Right. Welcome all YouTube people to the show, the Poet Book Club interview series. This is an in-person book club at the local bookstore with an Instagram portion as well that we do. The book club itself will also have an Instagram portion, but from time to time, if it's a local author, I tend to also interview the author themselves before the actual book club. And yeah, that's what the show is about. My name is Untitled Chapter. I'm a multi-creative storyteller, poet, and consultant, especially for creators especially creators of color to really, thrive in an environment of, systemic oppression, and still also trying to build a better system and better communities for ourselves. So that's what I help people do and what I focus on, and helping people set boundaries, find their focus, find their purpose. And today we have our guest, Anatalia Vallez, who wrote The Most Spectacular Mistake. It is an illustrated book of poems and a play. There's also a short play in the book. And yeah, earlier we were on Instagram Live, so this has two portions. The first portion is on Instagram Live, and then the second portion is shot on Zoom for YouTube. And we were just talking about Anatalia's journey with starting the book. So yeah, so welcome, Anatalia.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I didn't grow up thinking that I was going to be a writer. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just know that I wanted to do something creative that really fulfilled me, even as a child. And I come back to actually have conversations with my younger self, to check in with her and see, am I honoring her in my life? Am I giving her space to grow and to be herself? Because I'm very sensitive, I'm a highly sensitive person. Highly sensitive people don't tend to really, quote unquote, thrive in society. There's a lot of shame that goes with being highly sensitive. But I have learned through this book and through my experiences as a creative, to see it as a power, as a superpower, like as something that actually makes me more aware of things in a different capacity. And so since I was very little, I was very aware of people's energy. I was aware of inequality. Like I was just aware, like, this is not right. Like, even though the world says this is okay, it's not okay. And learning to express it on paper, because I wasn't always able to verbalize it. My mom says that she's impressed that I'm able to perform and do these things out in public, because there was a time when I was so shy and so scared of connecting with people that I would mumble and look down even when I was addressing people. And from that space, I was able to be really honest with myself from a really young age. I was my own face, I feel like, can't let me lie, like I think that it's so in me that it almost felt like it was too much. And so by writing, I was able to understand myself a little bit more. And when I started sharing my writing, I started getting to know people that felt the same way, and that also felt isolated, and they also felt or too shamed, as I see a lot of instances now as adults, too ashamed to reveal that part of themselves with people. So in the ways in which we're talking about like mental health and the ways that being depressed and very like high functioning works, you can still be really high functioning and like really sociable and be hurting a lot inside. And so the interesting thing is like, not only is it just for people that are very like water sign heavy, you know, and very sensitive, but it taps into the need for everyone to hold space for their child self, to hold space for the parts of themselves that they don't always share with the world. And I think that is sort of the gift that I've been able to foster through writing, through just a lot of writing, a lot of journaling over the years. And that's where it started. And I think that's sort of how I've been able to evolve as an artist and understand my place is not just to promote my work and but to create connections with other artists and collaborate. Like that is my jam. I love to do that because I know the power of it. I know the power of collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think that's why in your book you have a whole page, actually a whole poem called How to Have a Good Cry. And I think that's really important in our, at least here in the West, right? And here in the United States, there is Western culture or American culture has, yeah, they have a thing against, crying because it's seen as weak and really it's seen as feminine. It's really a war against the feminine and whatever is perceived as feminine. And so that's why we have statements like boys don't cry. But then again, women are also seen as weak when they cry as well. So it's all a war against whatever is perceived as feminine. So, this legacy of colonialism and colonization, that's actually really ongoing, right, in different ways. And I bring that up too because it's like I recently learned that I'm a Hindu and indigenous Hindu, and in pre-colonial times we have a system of architectural design for designing rooms called Vastu. And I believe the Chinese feng shui probably came from Vastu, since a lot of Hindu and Buddhist culture was exported to China from India. And so in the Vastu architectural design, in one of them, I literally saw uh, there's an entire room for crying. The crying was so important to these people that they included in their design a room for crying, so people can cry in that room safely.
Yeah. I was just reading, he just transitioned, Elder Malidoma Some, that talks about his upbringing and how grieving, it was talking about ritual, right? So looking at the elements and how they do ritual, how there's a whole way of moving with water, using water as a conduit, using water as part of a ritual, and how important it is to be witnessed when you are grieving, and how they take it very seriously. They're like, oh, your heart is aching. We need to come together as a community and support you and understand and like talk to you and process it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like that's it. It just seems so like when you're so stuck in a certain cultural norm, you want someone you and it's almost like that resistance, right? Because there's like some people that are resistant to that, but it's almost like you can't even imagine. Sometimes we can't even imagine what is possible because we're so adamant about this is how it is. This is how it's always been. This is always how it's always going to be. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And part of being a creative, I believe, is being able to have the capacity to imagine and to create and to connect with other folks that did do it differently, that were able to connect while grieving, that were able to process things. You know, we make so many assumptions. And I think that's one of so many amazing things about creativity and artistry, is being able to question, right? Why is this is normal? Why is this normal? Who does it serve and who does it hurt? And how can we change that? Because once we're able to locate, you think you have the power, it's like we're also taking the power back. We're starting to recognize,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to be able to reimagine and also reclaim the old ways in new contexts as well. And for me, that's why I've been on this search, especially lately, on different different ways of storytelling, right? From the old, colonial ways of doing it. It's like, especially in science fiction and fantasy. A lot of science fiction and fantasy is so far has been written by white male authors, and so first of all, I don't even see myself represented in the characters either. And then the setting is often inspired by old European settings as well. But even more importantly, a lot of the stories are just glorified colonialism, right? In like it's the same thing, but now it's in space, right? Like that's basically what Dune is about as well, right? So even when they're trying to escape into a new world, they're just recreating the old world. That's what they're doing, right? And so I've been on this search for like other ways of doing it. And early on, I discovered this collection called Octavia's Brood, science fiction from uh, social justice movements, edited by Adrienne Mary Brown. And well, I believe I have the book in front of me. Walida Imarisha, Imarisha, this one. And then lately I've also been exploring solar punk, which is a subgenre of steampunk. And solar punk is a more a lighter version of steampunk, and it explores more issues of sustainability, and the settings are in like solar wind farms with renewable energies and things like that. So again, it's about trying to imagine like new worlds, and yeah, and then lately I've even got this one because Southeast Asians are the most underrepresented, right? When it comes especially to this genre. So I have this collection called The Sea is Ours, Tales of Steampunk Southeast Asia. And that's really powerful as well, where, and I'm Southeast Asian, right? I'm both South Asian and Southeast Asian because I grew up in Burma, which is in Southeast Asia, but my ethnicity is Punjabi Hindu, so I'm also South Asian. So yeah, I've been exploring that. And that is so important to like explore, writers of color, and even then to, to really choose the writers of color who are not just acting as, mouthpieces for, colonialism, right? We call them, in our culture, we call them sepoys because they're named after the Indian soldiers who fought for the British Army back in the day. And so the modern day sepoys are the foot soldiers who carry on the same warfare, but in a psychological way, psychological warfare, right? So even then we have to be careful, like who we pick, right? Not just aim for diversity just for the sake of it, because that can also lead to tokenism, right? So like another example is like Ray Bearer by Jordan Ifrioko, which is a fantasy duology, which is which at first seems like a typical story about an empire and trying the rightful heir regaining the throne, which would be a typical European colonial story. But then she flips it in the middle, and she flips it again in the sequel as well, where it turns out the empire is not as good as we thought it was. It's been very problematic, a very harmful empire. So it's a metaphor for colonialism and how the hero or the heroine really of the story try to change it. And it talks about the resistance against the change. It even talks about how unity, right? The concept of unity is weaponized by the colonizers, uh, where they conflate unity with sameness and tries to make everyone the same, basically trying to make everyone white. And that's not a real unity. Real unity is recognizing each person's uniqueness, each culture's uniqueness, like in a color wheel, like embracing and celebrating our differences and not trying to make everyone the same. So yeah, we have to be able to imagine new things and also reclaim the old in new ways. Because even some of the stuff that we value are distorted and weaponized like that, like unity and even oneness, right? Like uh, our indigenous roots really value oneness, but our colonizers have even weaponized that and be like, they only speak of oneness when they want to appropriate our culture and be like, oh, but we're all one, but then never actually act like we're all one. Because if we were to actually act like we're all one, then they would stop being racist and stop their racism and their white supremacy and stop destroying the planet if they will really behave like we're all one. Yeah, that was a long rant.
Yeah, no, but it's totally, you brought up a lot of things. There's a poem, I believe it's Mayan, it's a Mayan poem. I don't speak the language, so I don't know the wording in the Mayan language, but in English it's you are my other me. If I love me and respect me, if I love you and respect you, I love me and respect me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. And I just like, for some reason, I guess because of undergrad or like how many people we would share this poem with one another and recite this poem as part of trying to do like conflict resolution and stuff like that. But outside of those spaces, that's not a common thing to talk about. It's not something that everybody knows. So it's important to keep sharing those things and to keep reminding one another, like the oneness that is sort of put out there is not it's not a band-aid, or it's not some way to sort of I'm trying to find the word of bypassing the real experiences of people. And I will say about what you were sharing about folks about books that I've learned recently. The politics of book publishing and book editing and who gets in the door and what you need to do to get through to these big publishing companies and what you need to do to be able to reach more people and sell more books and do all these things. And I'm very careful about not idealizing especially big name even BIPOC artists and writers, and
That's what I
to
was
not
trying to say. Even with they will only publish us if we act as mouthpieces for colonialism. That's basically it. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think it's nuanced, because I think that many people do it for many reasons, right? And I'm not here to judge anyone's decision on what they publish and why they publish it, but it's not always the artists that are the artists that are the highest in the hierarchy or whatever, that are the most recognized, that always end up having the most powerful, ingenious messages, if that makes sense. It's usually a lot of the people that they went to seminars with or they connected with at one point, and that's where they got some of it, and they got some of it here and they got some of it there, which to me is like, who do you know and how did you get there? And it's very intense. It's very intense, and I did not know that publishing a book would put a door, open up this door for me. And I've seen a lot, and so I'm very cautious of just don't try to idealize, right? We don't want to. I think about this: idealizing someone and hating someone are two sides of the same coin, because in both ways you sort of dehumanize them, and you because it's such a quick fall from grace, I think that's the phrasing, when they do something wrong. Because let me tell you, our writers are problematic. Lots of our favorite art writers have said some problematic stuff, and that doesn't mean that they're not incredible artists. It just also means that they're human and that they make mistakes. And so when we idealize someone to the point where we worship everything that they say, then we're also in a way dehumanizing them and putting them on a pedestal where it's harder to then have accountability when stuff goes down, if they're ever held accountable, when they make mistakes. And sometimes people make little mistakes, and then people make really big statements, and you're like, wow. So I think it's important. I think, to me, as a writer, I think it's important that we have these conversations about the nuance of becoming a writer, and what does that look like.
That's really important to realize. And also, going back to seeing them as human, right? That is really important. It's about overcoming the good evil plus binary. I just did a video on this earlier this morning, which I might post later, where And the subset of the good, evil, false binary is the demonization, exotic, perfection, false binary, which is why I wrote a whole poem on that as well. And that's the idea that, you know, there are only good people and evil people in the world, and good people can do no evil and no wrong, and then conversely, evil people can do no good. That's not reality. That's not the way the world works. That is a ridiculous fantasy that the colonizers put on us so that they can keep controlling and dividing us. Because the reality is there are no such thing as a good person nor a bad person. There are only people, period, who do good things and bad things, who do good things and harmful things. You know, that's how it is. And but what the colonizers have done is that they've created not only the binary, they've put themselves as the superior, perfect being, right, that can do no wrong. But conversely, when they put us in that pedestal of any one of us in that pedestal of being perfect, being these magical fairies or magical monkeys, uh, dancing for them or writing for them, the moment we make even a little bit of a mistake, they find a little bit of a flaw, we immediately like fall from that pedestal and we become their monster, their savages, their thugs. And this is literally reverse victimhood because they're the actual bullies. But the moment we question their racism, for example, right, then suddenly they call us racist or bullies for calling out their racism, right? And that's on a small personal scale, but on bigger scales, this is how we have, you know, cops, you know, killing a black man and then saying he was scared for his life. That's reverse victimhood. And on an even bigger scale, you know, the British soldiers, they criminalized 10 million Kaliwashan indigenous Hindu tribe members as thugs, right? Which, by the way, is the same thing that they call black men today, right? Thugs. They call this the same thing. And then they not only criminalized 10 million of us, they then committed a genocide and killed all of them, including newborn babies. Like it was a total genocide. But they did it by first calling the people they were genociding Dutch. And they still do that even to this day. They call us fascists now. That's the new word. It's a new, uh, it's the modern way of calling us savage for reclaiming our Hindu culture and saying, no, we'll no longer be colonized by you. And that's a real thing that's happening in India and around the world today. And but it ties in with the good, evil, false binary, right? Where, yeah, even among writers of color, like even when we may not always be acting as mouthpieces for colonialism, we might make some mistakes that are a result of being traumatized by colonialism, right? That's being an outpouring or outcropping of that. So, like for example, I haven't read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Maciel Garces, but I was interviewing a Puerto Rican woman of color, and she was saying there is some amount of anti-blackness in that novel. So I'll take her word for it, right? Which would make sense since there is colorism throughout South America because of colonialism again, right? And then when I read Paulo Coelho, who is Brazilian, right? And although he is very word passing as well, right? I reread The Alchemist, which is famous around the world, and I was really like shocked and disappointed to see that he not only uses the G word in the beginning of the novel, he uses the entire like racist anti-Romani aesthetic in the novel. So the G word is GYPSY. So it's a racial slur against the Romani people. And but it's one thing to just use the slur, but he actually used the entire aesthetic this character in the novel was not only called by that name, but in exactly the entire stereotype. And they're oppressed to this day. For they were enslaved in Romania for 500 years, for one thing. And even to this day, they're oppressed. They have their children taken away from them. They're sterilized over in Europe. Even today, this is happening. But meanwhile, Kohala was making money and sort of, profiting off this aesthetic. And
Yeah.
that and yet the novel isn't a bad novel. There's some, good things that you can come out of, that you can learn from it. But it's to have the discernment and
Yeah.
be like, this is a person who has done good and also done harm, and he's neither good nor bad as a person, but to be real about his actions and impact.
Right. Yeah. Which to me lends to like, then what do you recommend? Right? Like what books do you recommend? Like, okay, the Message of the Alchemist, because there's so many books. We're never going to be able to read all the books in the world. So I'm just like, well, if there's a message, maybe there's another book that has a similar message that shares this, that's from a local artist, or like someone that's like emerging, whatever emerging is, like a new artist, right? A new writer, and that shares it in this other beautiful way. And let's share that. Let's boost up that that writer, because it really shows. I take recommendations really seriously. So when people are like, oh, I recommend this book, and I'm like, yeah, like tell me about it, because that to them is like there's a connection there. And yeah, it's the yeah, you brought up colorism, and my goodness, that exists so much. I just had a dream last night, and I have to record this dream down, where people in Mexico, because there is colonization of people of native folks in that country, and not continuously, they were going further and further and further and further from the city, and they were basically creating like amusement parks, or like just every time that they would go and they would create something there, more people would go there, and so it was less land that was left for native folks. And so it's just like our own people, we can't, it's so hard to really sparse this out for a lot of people of like the diaspora, because it's so nuanced, the way in which we then try to colonize each other, and continue to do so. And so it's just J Balvin, this is random, but it's connected. White, I'm say like white Latino, Puerto Rican hip hop artist, got an award yesterday, or was awarded with Afro Latino Musician of the Year. And people are so upset about it. People are just like up in arms, because this artist has done blatantly anti-Black stuff, but using music that is heavily inspired, if not like mostly coming from Black artists in the diaspora in Latino America, and taking the credit and making millions of dollars off of it. And but to the music industry, they just see well, this person can make music. This person sells records. So we're gonna keep giving him awards. And it's just, it's when it's so in your face, I think for people that are iffy about having conversations about colorism, to see it so blatantly in your face, I hope is enough for people to start really like confronting this, what artists we uplift and what it means to give our money, our attention, our value on artists that are causing harm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It is important to call it out. It's, it happened even even to me like 2 years ago when there's apparently Latino band. I haven't met them in person. I've been told at least some members are also white passing, and they their band name was called Mantra, which is an appropriation of my Hindu culture, right? And they wanted to perform at our local event, Mo Better Mondays. And so I contacted the organizer and I was like, well, the host and Frosty, right? And I was like, this is not okay. And then, I would want them to either change their name or not perform. And by the way, this was around the same time that the the G Word Dan Cafe in Santa Ana had changed their name to just the Dan Cafe once they realized that the G Word is a racial slur against the Romani people. So, and their business has been around for over 30 years, and they were able to change it like that, right? And the Mantra band was probably been around maybe a few years at the most. And yeah, like they were being ridiculously resistant, right? And defensive. And again, going back into reverse victimhood tropes. At first, they were like, "Oh no, we can't change it so quickly," So we debunked that by pointing out the Dan Cafe did. And then they started getting more and more ridiculous, like, "Oh, like you know, you have you're speaking in English and you have a white phone." I'm like, "What the hell is a white phone?" Even though, first of all, most companies are created by Asian companies. And second of all, in reality, VoIP was invented by a Black woman. And the mobile phone, the first version of it was actually invented by a Black man. Most people don't know this. But yeah, they were like literally using the same, like, hilarious, ridiculous arguments, faceless arguments that the same like white people use to defend appropriation. Like, us using English is not appropriation. It's actually, ironically, a legacy of colonialism and colonization. We were forced to use English, and that's why we use it today, because our languages were erased by them.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good conversation. I really appreciate unpacking all of this, and we don't have to tie it up into a delicate bow in order for it to be valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's important too, that like yeah, this is the these are real things happening in the world, and I think that sometimes doing the right thing and calling something out and having these conversations are not easy, um but they are necessary. And I think that
Yeah.
that's something that I want to continue exploring, maybe in my writing or maybe in other ways. Like, it's okay to have that difficult conversation, um because even
Hmm.
if you don't quote unquote win that battle, they will still think about it in a more nuanced way the next time. um I think about like my responsibility to like tell someone when they have caused me harm, either um intentionally or unintentionally, and how sometimes um that can feel like a burden, and that can
Hmm.
feel like too much. And so I have to be selective about what and how I share it, um
Hmm.
because it's also like I don't want to put that burden on myself also to like try to like teach this person how to treat others, um because
Hmm.
that's not my lesson to learn. Like, if anything, that person should become more aware of like the harm that they did, um but it shouldn't always land on the person that was harmed to do the teaching. um
Hmm.
I think there are a lot of people out there that do that labor of supporting folks and trying to unpack, right, why harm is done and why people behave in certain ways, but it's not always just being able to understand that it's not always our responsibility to teach people, especially if they're not open to having a conversation,
Hmm.
um, to knowing, okay, this is as
Hmm.
far as I'm willing to go. This is as much as I'm
Hmm.
willing to share with you. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of book recommendations, yeah, I do recommend Parable of the Sower, of course, Octavia
Mhm.
Butler,
I
as
love
well as the sequel, Parable of the Talents. And it was written in 1993 and it's very prophetic. Like in the sequel, there's literally a presidential candidate who became president with the slogan "Make America Great Again." Uh, and this was written like over 20 years ago. And
Mhm.
it's set in 2024, which is just like 2 years from
Mhm.
now. So
Mhm.
it's really important. If we want to understand the times we live in, I recommend that. And
Mhm.
also Ray Bearer, right? The one that I mentioned earlier.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's only one very small issue where there's a one line that mentioned the word mantra, but it's not even a central part of the story, so I don't mind it. That and I think she also mentioned it because it's supposed to be a multicultural empire with like different regions meant to be a reflection of different ethnicities in the real world as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, other than that, so it's an amazing novel, and I was really surprised to hear the good news that uh, Netflix has optioned it for a series,
Mhm.
because normally, like I said, these big corporations don't uh, support things that speak out against colonialism,
Mhm.
and yet so it's amazing news that they actually option that.
I think they do. I think Netflix is finding I think Netflix is finding a lot of money in these types of stories, so they're doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to your book and also what we spoke earlier about unity and oneness and things like that, I love that in your poetry, even when you're reclaiming self-love and self-esteem, you do it in a very communal sense rather than an individualistic sense. And I think that's really important in this hyper-individualistic culture, where often self-love is only talked about in a very grandiose, individualistic way. Like I was telling Edvis slash Kelvin on his show, What's the Word Wednesdays, that, and because the topic was self-esteem, I was mentioning how that first of all, self-esteem should only apply to us, oppressed or marginalized people. It cannot apply to the oppressor because when they're saying they're reclaiming self-esteem, they're just being grandiose and being more oppressive than usual. Like, like even the Marianne Williamson quote, right, which was written by a white woman who turned out to be directly racist towards me and eventually started running for president, right? Her quotes in the Return to Love when she was saying, we ask ourselves, who am I to be fabulous, and beautiful, etc. Actually, who are you not to be, right? And and she went on to say basically that, we don't help others by playing small, etc. Right? But because it's written by a white person, in retrospect, and also because of what she did to me, as well as a whole bunch of Black women in that Facebook thread, in retrospect, I see that quote as very grandiose now and very hyper individualistic. It's not really a reclaiming of real self-love or real self-esteem, right? So going back to who do you recommend, right? So even when it comes to reclaiming self-esteem, self-love, instead of that quote, I would actually recommend one of your poems, which I will read now. It's called "Beauty is in the Eye of My Beloved." The Spanish coming out of the corners of my mouth are my parents peeking in to say good morning. The bellows on my arms and brows are my grandma protecting me from harsh sun rays. The twinkle in my brown eyes is my grandfather's smile. The brown skin you cringe at is my connection to the cosmos. And for every revolution around the sun, I can't help but grow unapologetically.
Yeah, I I think a lot about age and the privilege of being able to
Mhm.
um see myself grow older, and how that is not something that is in society viewed as beautiful.
Mm.
But I think it's amazing to be able to live a life where
Mm.
you see traces of your lineage, um, and how those things change over time and you change over time. And somehow, because I feel like I'm always learning about myself and my inner self. I'm learning about the world, and it's changing. I'm changing. And so I think that was sort of an homage to understanding
Mm.
how beautiful it is to grow older in this body, and to have those parts of
Mm.
me that can be traced. And I can go, it's almost like I have my lineage, I have my ancestors with me wherever I go. And so wherever I take
Mhm.
myself, I take them. And by extension, this book, wherever this book
Mhm.
goes, is where we all kind of travel there too. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that's where that kind of book was, or that poem was coming from a place of understanding and recognizing and loving every revolution around the sun. Every
Mm,
year that I'm growing to love myself a little bit more.
I love that. I didn't see that aspect until you mentioned this. So I'm glad you said that. That goes back to the good, evil, false binary, right? And not seeing ourselves as a noun, but seeing ourselves as a verb, because the good, evil, false binary also packs us into a static, never changing now, but in reality, we are ever changing, ever growing, ever evolving verbs, right? When like
Mhm.
even our bodies, right? They're our cells, different cells in our bodies are changing at different rates, and I think our entire body changes every 7 years, something like that. Where so
Mhm.
literally even your body right now is not the same as your body 7 years ago, right? You have a completely different body.
Yeah.
So yeah, to recognize, so as people too, like who you are a year ago is not the same as who you are now, and it will not be the same as who you are a year later, or sometimes even a day later, depending on how fast, and growth also happens at different rates at different periods of our lives. So to recognize that people are not these static nouns, but these verbs that are growing. So now I do see how you included the people at different ages, right? When you were putting that poem, I love that aspect. But what I also love is how when you're reclaiming your self-love, you are reclaiming it as not an individual, but as somebody who is part of a community, and the entire community speaks and expresses through you, like your grandmother and your mother and etc. That is not You're not a lone individual. Like your self-love is part of a collective, so it's a communal, love expressing through you, almost like your self-love is more like you're a vessel of love that, where
Mm.
love is expressed through you and you experience it yourself first, and then others experience it through you. And I love how powerful that is. And that's why, like for me, like that's why I love that poem, where it's like, wow, like that's a beautiful way of looking at the idea of loving ourselves and reclaiming our, so-called self-worth, etc. Because that's true. Like we are the product of entire communities and entire generations, and multiple stories of many different generations, multiple experiences. So when we reclaim our self-love, it has to be done through that
Mhm.
connection with others and recognizing, like, the impact we have on each other.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah.
Uh,
Love.
Um, so I want to wrap this up. Before I do, yeah, this was a great interview. Uh, and I would love to hear that poem from your own voice too, if you have the book handy.
Yeah. That same poem.
That same poem, yeah.
Trying to find it. Okay.
I think it's page 48. Yeah.
Beauty is in the eye of my beloved. The Spanish coming out of the corners of my mouth are my parents peeking in to say good morning. The pelos on my arms and brows are my grandma protecting me from harsh sun rays. The twinkle in my brown eyes is my grandfather's smile. The brown skin you cringe at is my connection to the cosmos. And for every revolution around the sun, I can't help but grow unapologetically.
I love it. Yeah, yeah. And also for people who are watching on YouTube and the replay, etc. I also want to point out there's also these two don't raise him, he's not your son. Those are also powerful poems and reclaiming self-love in a different way, right? Where again, it's about recognizing that it doesn't happen in a vacuum, like doesn't happen alone, that it's happening in relationship with others, that the reason why we even have to reclaim self-love is because we've been told over and over that we're not good enough, whether directly, verbally, or via, the hurt that we've experienced by others, including both on a systemic scale with things like systemic racism and queerphobia and sexism, etc. Like I'm consider myself, non-binary, gender fluid, and my pronouns are they, them. So that's why I'm including queerphobia as well as sexism, but also on a personal level, like you describe in those poems, right, where it's important to recognize those as well, like that all of this happens on a relational level, like in a relational way, in a communal way, as well as on the larger scale, the systemic way. And that's actually one of the reasons why I love those poems by you as well.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much for your time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so for those watching on YouTube, there will be a book club in person at our Reader bookstore in Tustin this Sunday, January 2nd, 2022 at noon PST/3 p.m. PST. And depending on how many people show up at the book club, we may also go on Instagram Live again with other book club members as well. And yeah, and I believe Anatalia will be there as well, because one of the reasons why this book club is in person, even though, we still have a certain level of social distancing from the pandemic and all, I think it's important to reclaim our in-person communities in the world of social media where everything's impersonal and it's getting very like addictive and it's filtered by what the algorithm wants you to see, which may not always be to our benefit. So by having these community events in person, we get to express more freely what we want to express, what we need to express, right? Because like even this YouTube video that we're putting out, I can post it in different Facebook groups, etc., right? But still, like I have very little control over how many it reaches, who it reaches, etc. Whereas when we do in-person community events, it goes much deeper, and we know exactly who it reaches, how many it reaches. It's more unfiltered. So if you can, if you're local, I highly recommend coming to that, and as well as future in-person community events in person as well, so that we can support local authors of color and also create real community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So do you have any like last words about like what inspired some of your poems, or your what got you to write or finish the book, right? And what's it been like so far?
Yeah, I think it's been a process, but I think community There we go again. Community has been so instrumental. I think once I started sharing about it, and I was like, "Hey, I think I'm gonna write a book," and they're like, "Yeah, when?" And I was like, "But I don't know yet. Like I don't know. I'm still putting it together." And so every time it was the sort of accountability hack here. You tell enough people, right? And I didn't tell many people, but you tell enough people, and they're like, "When's the book coming out? When's the book?" you know. And so that was like, oh, okay, I need to just put something together. And very much to the effect of the most spectacular mistake, I had to just embrace the fact that it was going to be a book and not the book that was going to document or that was going to share everything that I had to say. It was going to be documenting and sharing what I could, and in this specific way. A lot of it was very intuitive and a lot of waiting, I guess I can say, like waiting for the right time, waiting for a time where I wasn't resistant, and lots of editing. I learned a lot about myself through the editing process. In the ability to be able to see it in different eyes, and that's a whole other conversation to have. Editing the work and not taking it personal and not taking it as like the essence of what I was saying is still there. It's just not going to be, it's just changed and it evolves and I think that is a big part of publishing, is being able to understand and not take editing personally, and yeah, it's a delicate dance, I think. And then working with my friend for the cover, John Jairo Valencia, through all of it, I just gave him my manuscript and I was like, here, read it and draw something. And I was like, I trust you, anything you draw. And that's when he started putting up the different images. I can share more about that at the book club, what all of the different images sort of signify in the front, because there's a lot of imagery there. And yeah, we wanted to make it magenta. So it's a pink. And it is also a reclaiming of my femininity, because growing up, I was taught that like pink was very girly and you didn't want to do that. And so magenta is also a really powerful color. A very, very powerful color. And so that was also a way of sharing a message, even with just the cover and the book. And without even opening it, you're already getting to see a peek of what's inside. So everything was very, very intentional. It took a while, but everything, where poems are, how long they are, where sections cut off, where like everything was very, very intentional for a reason. And I'm really grateful. Yeah, I'm really grateful for it. And if anyone wants to reach out and is interested in publishing and is interested in putting their work out there in this way, let me know. You can reach me on Instagram, Anatalia Vallez. I'm also on Twitter with Anatalia Vallez. And I'm super down to support in any way that I can, because I think it's well worth it as a form of exploring one's writing to publish.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you wrote it, because as I was saying on Instagram Live earlier, and I wanted to reiterate it for the YouTube audience, that a book is a great way to quote unquote scale your impact without your physical presence. And this book has reached so many people in so many different states, and who knows what impact it has made. But I love the story that we experienced recently with this book club already, even though the actual book club hasn't even happened yet. But But because I'm doing it at the local bookstore, they ended up getting, 6 copies when normally, uh, they might have got just 1 or 2, or even none at all, since they might not have heard of the book before. So that's a great way of supporting local authors of color, is to also just do a book club at the local bookstore. It ends up supporting the bookstore, supporting the author, as well as the readers. They get to read a book they've never heard of. So yeah, she was like really excited last week when I went to her and the owner, and she said, "Oh, like we ordered 6 copies and it's all sold out, and we got to order more." And then she said, even better news is like, my friend was reading this out loud, a random page, in front of my mother-in-law, and she just, she was so moved, she just, burst into tears. And I was like, that's amazing that it could provide that release through this written word, through this physical object, without even your physical or even online presence at all, without you being there at all. And that's really powerful.
Yes, I'm super excited for Sunday.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, everyone who will be watching the replay. Thank you, Anatalia, Vallez. And yeah, I appreciate you being on this interview. I'm really looking forward and excited for the book club as well.
Thank you, Kundan. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, everyone who's watching. Happy reading the book. Hope you will buy the book and read it.